This is the Cereal at Midnight podcast. Hey guys, welcome to the Cereal at Midnight podcast. My name is Heath Holland, and this week I'm talking to the people behind a new documentary called Only in Theaters, which focuses on the Laemmle theater chain, specifically Gregory Laemmle, the subject of the documentary and the president of the Laemmle theater chain. The film is directed by Raphael Sbarge. I'm talking to him and to Gregory about the importance of independent theaters, about the Laemmle family. Now, you know, if keen Cereal at Midnight followers know that I just talked to Antonia Carlotta a few weeks ago, who is also a member of the Laemmle family. Movies run in the blood of the Laemmles, and it was such an honor and a privilege to be able to talk to Gregory about basically about running an independent theater chain, guys. There's so much here. The documentary, I try my best not to spoil the narrative of this documentary through this interview. It's hard to talk about it without there being any spoilers. Now you might be like, it's a documentary. How do you spoil a documentary? Well, there is a story here. It is the story of the struggles to run an independent theater chain in the time of mega blockbusters, in the time when interest in independent cinema seems to be on the decline among the mainstream, when streaming is a threat, when the big blockbuster movies are a threat, and then the pandemic also plays a role in this movie. That's all I'm going to say, but it's a call to action to support the arts, to support independent theaters. If you're in California and you're near a Laemmle, you're going to want to go check out a movie at, or, a bunch of movies at a Laemmle theater. But this was a really interesting opportunity, I'm grateful that Kino Lorber, so the movie's playing all over the country in independent theaters, but there's also a DVD. So if you can't get to an independent theater or you don't have one, Kino Lorber has released a DVD, and that is what opened the door for this interview. And it's a great DVD. I've reviewed this. There's a review for this at CerealAtMidnite.com. It's on Letterboxd. It's at the critics section of IMDb. There's the film itself, and then lengthy special features. There are extended interviews with Ava DuVernay, with Cameron Crowe, with Leonard Maltin. Many people talking about their love for the theater itself, as streaming has entered the chat. With everything that's going on in the world right now, it's more important than ever to have that communal cinematic experience. And is it in danger? I don't know. That's the question that this documentary. That's one of the things. This documentary is about so much. That's one of the things this documentary seeks to talk about. So I'm just going to cut to this interview. I'm so grateful to be able to talk to Raphael Sbarge, who you know from so many appearances, Longmire, Once Upon a Time. We talked about Lottery. Amanda Reyes talked about Lottery in her last appearance here. We're going to talk about Lottery here. And Gregory Laemmle, getting the inside scoop from someone that's been running a theater chain for a long time. This is a fascinating conversation. I hope you enjoy it. So Amanda Reyes is a super TV fanatic, and I was talking to her about kind of what's happening right now in the industry, and she brought up Lottery from 1983 into 1984. You were on that show. You did a spot on that show. I just wanted to ask you about that. Like, do you remember? Because here's the thing, that show only survives now. Like it's like dropped off the face of the earth, and people have uploaded it to YouTube, but it's in German. We don't even have them in English.
Oh my God.
Do you remember being on that show?
I do. Yeah. It was really a long time ago. It was like probably 1984 or something like that.
Yeah.
It's so funny. It's so random. I mean, look, I've been blessed with an amazing career, and I have all sorts of. I had the weirdest thing last night. I went to see mostly Mozart at Lincoln Center, and I got a friend in an extra seat. We were in the second row center, and there was an amazing orchestra. At the very end, we're all, after people left the stage, the one of the bassists turns to me and says, "Longmire."
Yeah.
I did a bunch of episodes of Longmire. I was like, yeah, how random. So I get sort of it's funny having done this in front of the camera for so long. It comes out of nowhere. But Lottery, Longmire, these are all sort of shows that are. It's funny that they come back around, but I'm happy they make people happy.
What's the thing you get the most? What do you recognize for the most?
These days, probably Once Upon a Time.
Yeah, you did the most appearances on that, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, it was a huge hit series for 6 years, and I was on it not every year, but I was a regular for a bit, and then an irregular. But Yeah, and then I mean, and then just sort of, oh, you look like that guy, like, who are you, like, did I go to school with you, that kind of thing.
But it speaks to the power of physical media that this stuff, sometimes just kind of disappears.
So the
Yes.
guy with the theater chain. How do you feel? How do you feel about physical media?
Look, yes, I run a movie theater, but obviously I also care about the art form, I guess, and that things just can disappear in this digital. I mean, at any age, obviously, even you know, movies from earlier in the the early days of cinema are gone. We know about that, and stuff can deteriorate. But here's a television show from the '80s, and it may not exist
Yeah.
at some level.
How I'm curious, Raphael, how did you go? Like, what got you interested in this story? And what was the story? What brought you to this in the first place? Because the narrative kind of where we start and where it goes, I wonder, like, what was the thread you were pulling at when you started the process?
I guess I have a standard answer for this, but I'm going to answer this in an unstandard way. Is that the other day I got an email from a dear friend of mine who's a filmmaker, and she wrote me and said, "Thank you for making such an important film. And clearly you had no idea what you were doing when you started in terms of where it was going to go with the story. And thank you for sticking with it because it's such an important story." And I love that because she understands as a filmmaker. There was a sort of there is, there's two kinds of Ira Deutschman said this in that Q&A, Greg. There's two kinds of docs. There's the kind of doc where you know what you're doing and you go out and you do that. There's the other kind where you kind of let it happen, and this is far more dangerous, and absolutely even beyond any of our wildest imaginings, the way life changing, world events basically sort of interceded with the story. And I, to me, the appeal was always the family, the family business, the family is what I kept saying to myself. And that was kind of the through line. That's what touched my heart. That's what brought me in. I have also an immigrant family business in, my father's family were Ukrainian Jews that came here and started a shmata business in New York, a linen business in the garment district. And there was something familiar and made me feel at home with this family. And that was always how I continue to sort of thread the needle, as we went through so much. We shot this over 2.5 years, and to Greg's credit, Greg and the family had no editorial control in the making of this. In point in fact, actually, Greg made a very concerted point of saying that he didn't want to see the film until he saw it along with an audience for the first time. This was really, he was open to this endeavor, come what may, as it were. I'm certain it was very uncomfortable to see it the first 10 times. And I know, because we've spoken about it, there are things in it that are difficult. But that Greg, understands within the context of this anyway, that the telling of this story about this family then ultimately, my hope, and it seems to have translated, is that it tells a story about so many other families, whether they be in the movie business or outside of the movie business, and that it also backed into sort of a larger zeitgeist of what's going on. What we read in newspapers, headlines about any number of current hot topics, as it were, certainly in the entertainment industry, but through the vantage of a family and the effect of this family, this very remarkable hallowed family, because of their relationship to Hollywood, over a century. The hope was to be able to kind of tell a personal story about what we now know is a very public and complicated social issue, which is, the future of media, the future of movie theaters, and then the challenges the family businesses face.
Well, Greg, I'm curious, as someone who has movies in their blood, and you have a responsibility to the cinema screen. How does it feel to you when you are approached about this and you realize you're going to be on the other side of it? Like, what made you say yes? I guess is what I'm curious about.
Well, I said yes because I had seen Raphael's previous films. He would appear in one of them. And I sensed that he was somebody who um, had an appreciation for the history of the city of Los Angeles and what are the things that make Los Angeles unique? What are the things that make, our cities unique? So for me, when we started, certainly having no idea where things were going to go, but that was really at some level the kernel of the story. It was about finding appreciation for our local institutions and understanding where they've come from and how precious they are and how quickly they can, how without care or nurturing things can disappear. Talking, LA Foodways about the history of agricultural production in Los Angeles and and how that relates to food deserts that we now have in our inner cities and efforts, that people were making to, to bring some of that back. So, for me, that was where I thought the story might be and why Raphael was, the appropriate person to tell that story. That said, it was not my choice. Many filmmakers have come and said, somebody should make a movie about Laemmle theaters. Raphael was the first person that walked in and said, I want to make the movie about, will you let me make the movie, a documentary about Laemmle theaters? And in this case, yeah, I felt, like saying yes, because it was a story that I didn't necessarily know how, meaningful the story might end up being, but it was something that I wanted to see documented, very more specifically, perhaps in the sense of the relationship of cities and the institutions that make up the city. That it became a more meta story is, just where we ended up going.
I want to talk about the meta story too, but I also want to establish for whoever's listening to this or watching this, the importance of the Laemmle theaters. I'm in a place in the country that does not have anything remotely close to what you have built and what you curate. For me, going to the movies is going to a multiplex with 18 screens or whatever. They do not show. They'll show, this is frustrating for me, and maybe you can speak to it, but they'll show an independent movie, one showing. It's usually Thursday night at 7 p.m. And it's almost like it's an obligation. That's the only time they show it. And then Friday, of course, it's the big blockbuster. Right. For anybody that's in the country or in the world that's watching this, and they're like, well, what's the big deal about an independent theater that like, why should I care about any of this? Could you speak just a little bit to that?
Well, I think you care about an independent theater the same way you care about an independent bookstore or, a local restaurant that, provides, great food and a different experience. Yeah, are you getting the same meal at Applebee's? No, you can get food, you can get some kind of nourishment, but you're ultimately not getting the same thing. And I get it. Look, there are a lot of parts of this country that don't have independent movie theaters, but there are plenty that do. And in some cases there is a interesting and growing trend towards people reclaiming a movie theater in their community and creating a community-based exhibition space. Not like Laemmle theaters, it's not a for-profit business necessarily, but still that we want these kinds of places to exist. Because yeah, if we are reliant on what the commercial multiplex is going to do, it's going to be limited, and it's going to be very limited in many cases. But even in that environment, you can get people. We have one of our screenings of Only in Theaters was at the South Bay Film Society, which is at a local AMC 20plex in Rolling Hills, in the South Bay of Los Angeles. And there's one individual who, makes an effort to bring a film a month, I think, or a film a week, whatever, and show an art film. And he's cultivated an audience, and 200 or 300 people show up to see these movies. But it requires a lot of dedication on the part of that one person to make these kinds of things happen. But I guess if the film can inspire more people to take on that role, to create exhibition opportunities, however they might come together, your community will be richer for that. because people will come together. They will, um, they'll have an experience that's beyond just being able to see the movie, on their couch. Um, that is something that exists, and that allows people to live wherever they want to live, and they can have access to as many films as, someone who haunts, the downtown art houses of Manhattan can see, but they can't see it in the same environment, and their community will reflect that.
And Heath, I know you said you're in Alabama and I'm in New York, and I am aware of the fact that some people listening to this might not know Laemmle theaters, might not, ever, been to Los Angeles for that matter, or even have a desire to. But the fact is, and the hope was that we could tell a story in the specific that became the universal. And in point of fact, actually, we're now, just been released with Kino Lorber on DVD, which we're very excited about. And there's lots of extras on it. And this release is a wonderful culmination after the fact that we played 80 theaters. We were
including Birmingham.
Including Birmingham, right? There you go. That's right. And we, in the course of that, in the various venues, in the various cities and small towns that we played in, and internationally, what I was delighted at was that even if people had never heard of Laemmle, they spoke very personally about the theater that most closely resembled the Laemmle theater in their neighborhood. Now, in your case, of course, you've got the multiplex, but in many towns, there are still, local theaters or local art house theaters, and they carry a great emotional weight for people in those communities. And by and large, they've been struggling or, been dealing with a lot of downward pressure. So the hope, and while it wouldn't have been easy for any of us to been followed around with a camera for a couple of years, particularly over the past few years, in the good news about the toughness of the story, hopefully, is that it becomes illustrative of what other people have really gone through, and or what the mission is to sort of continue to sort of want to fight for keeping theaters alive, what they bring. I don't care how big your television is. The fact is that, being in a movie theater is a special experience. It's a movie experience. It's real estate dedicated to a socialized, opportunity to have the emotion of the story amplified by the crowd, by the gathering, and also by the fact is that there's no interruptions, the fact that you're in this space with a large screen. All of these things are part of that experience. And as we see, of course, now people are coming back this weekend and last weekend to the Barbenheimer, moment. People do love going to the movies. Part of this is about trying to remind them about what a wonderful thing it is, because I think we've sort of fallen out of the habit.
I don't want to spoil the narrative for anybody. I want people to go watch the documentary. By the way, the documentary is linked in the description of wherever you're listening to this or watching this. But it is important to promote the arts. And I hear a lot people say movies aren't art. I'm getting pushback on that more and more and more. People say movies aren't art, which boggles my mind, because of course they're art. Could you speak to that? Both of you, I would like both of you to speak to that, because it's something I'm pushing back against pretty much every day, is that it's not a product. I mean, it is a product, but it's art.
Probably.
Let the artist go first.
Yeah, that's one of those ones. It's it's the Virginia Woolf quote. How can I explain it to you if you don't know what I mean? If someone has that feeling, I can't shake it from them, because it's just such an abstract thought to me. Even commercials on television, require an elevated sense of artistry, in that you have to tell something in 30 seconds. Now, yeah, maybe you're selling a pizza, but the fact is that there's a lot of skill in that, and the skill, just like the carpenter who made your shelf behind you, someone has to know how to be able to sort of create form and function to be able to sort of bring them together to do something very efficiently. And there's an artistry in that. And that's just the way it is. I could go on, but I think I'll leave it at that. Go ahead, take it, Greg.
Yeah, I mean, there is a commercial element to movies, because typically they are sold as a product, whether it's at the movie theater or buying a DVD or in some other way. But you could say that about so many other, theater, opera, so many other things that are considered art, or I would think other people would consider art, also either started that way or combine those elements. So within the most commercial film, you're going to find moments of artistic expression, and obviously within art house cinema, I guess, even if they are more clearly trying to make an artistic statement, they're still having to address certain commercial realities, and in some level, that's why I like to plant a flag for commercial art house exhibition rather than the non-for-profit model, because it really does force us to confront our audience. We need to meet the audience where they are. We also need to make an effort to bring the audience to things that may not seem so immediately commercial, and try and help them find those things. And it serves as this giant chain. I mean, this past weekend, you can't talk about Barbie and Oppenheimer without looking at the indie roots of the filmmakers that are involved there. And in some respects, what makes those, the commercial success of those films so, noticeable is that they also are, both films very much represent a personal statement about our world.
Yeah. The thing that I love about, one of the many things that I love about the movie is that it captures a changing culture at the exact moment of transformation. And it couldn't have been planned. It's just one of those things that everything lined up in kind of an unfortunate way because we're talking about the pandemic, but it allowed this incredible narrative to emerge about, there's a shift at the beginning of the movie. The conversation is one thing, and then it turns into something else. And we're watching this evolution. And again, I don't necessarily want to spoil this for the viewer that still hasn't seen the documentary, but that is what happens is we see the toll of the pandemic, and we're already worried about you, Greg. Like, we're already concerned about, how you're feeling, what's going on. And then it just goes to another level. Raphael, could you speak just a little bit about when this started to happen? You're starting to see the changes where you're coming at it from, from a filmmaking perspective, from a narrative perspective. Just talk to me a little bit about that.
I came to this and sort of inserted myself into the movie in a small way as a representative of many filmmakers who told me their story of having reached out to Laemmle theaters and having, been somehow touched or affected, or that the course of their life had been somewhat altered by virtue of the opportunity to meet a theater owner who would then actually be willing and accessible in a way. Greg doesn't give it away. However, at the same time, there's a sense of there being a real support, like, hey, how can we help? And Ava DuVernay told this story, and on and on. A friend of mine got an Oscar, he said, because he qualified at one of the theaters, and et cetera. I mean, there's so many stories, but this theater in this very specific world, which is Los Angeles and Hollywood and the center of the film industry for all intents and purposes, has had this sort of profound, it's sort of a transmission point for so many and so many filmmakers for decades. Why they got the French Legion of Honor, for example, from the French government for their support of French, French New Wave, and on and on and on. All of that was an interesting story. What then happened were a series of sort of things where, as we follow it, like a wait, what kind of moments, that then wait, what? And I, as a filmmaker, then was given this opportunity to sort of say, well, do I go left or do I go right? In other words, do I say, oh, no, I want to tell this story, what happened to me, and with the love and respect, in this case, of my incredible crew, who then decided to say, okay, we see that this is an important story. Many of them said, okay, I'm going to continue working on this. I had to raise some money. I had to put some of my own money into this, and we scrambled to try and keep up with then the story that was literally playing out in real time. We are, in some extraordinary circumstances, literally in the room where it happened, it's sort of incredible that we were. Again, that's because of Greg's giving us such a commitment to really sort of tell a truthful story. Clearly, Greg has shown a gajillion documentaries, knows what a good makes a good documentary, and part of that is, truth and a human story. Greg brought that, as well as in a lot of access. What we ultimately did was follow the story, and I didn't know what the ending was going to be. We didn't really have a clear picture, and while yes, over the 2.5 years that we sort of followed the story, the pandemic happened. The pandemic is an important part, but it's about 6 minutes of the movie. At the end of the day, it is an element in a much larger story. And I can even say, while the pandemic was obviously beyond words devastating, and loss of life and everything, in the course of the story, it's also somewhat of a metaphor as well for some of the challenges.
We're still in a process of getting an audience back, and I can argue that a significant percentage of the movie-going audience is back, not 100%, and certainly not 100% of the art house audience. But look, it took 10 years for my family to from the advent of television to when we went from 6 screens to 1, it took 10 plus years for us to start expanding again. Sometimes these cataclysmic events have a long tail, and the expectation that just because the forest fire is over, that the forest comes back, that's not how it works. It takes time for a forest to grow back. It goes through various stages of regrowth. It's going to take time for us to rebuild our business, and we're still understanding and learning what those processes are going to look like. But I for one believe that, having experimented with this concept of immediately bringing movies out on streaming platforms, we've seen that, at least economically, that doesn't work. I would argue that aesthetically it doesn't work at all, and that we're proving right now that people want to see movies in movie theaters. We just need to rebuild it.
For both of you, from your different perspectives, how does streaming coexist? Because it's not going to go away. How does it coexist with the theatrical model?
Well, look, we've been living with ancillary access to movies for 60, 70 years now. Is streaming different than TV? Certainly. Is it different than VHS and DVD and cable? Yes, I get that it's different, but that people can see movies in some place other than a movie theater, that's not new. It's not new at all. I think what's new about streaming is well, look, there's an economic reality that subscription is different from transactional. And part of the reason we're also going through the strike right now is that the studios are unsure, perhaps, that's what the economic repercussions are of this system that they're now committed to, and can it provide the revenue that they need, and certainly can it provide the revenue and the reporting that is required for the talent that creates these kinds of things. So that, how do you calculate residuals when there's no way to reap direct economic benefit from something that is hyper successful, as opposed to something that is just there and created. And we're going to be digging this stuff apart for a long time.
And just to piggyback on that, I mean, one of the things I think, as far, I mean, yes, streaming's not going to go away, and nor is AI, just to go with a buzzword of the moment. But it's how it basically gets incorporated. I mean, as far as streaming is concerned, one of the things, there was a grand experiment that happened, obviously, that directly impacted movie theaters during the shutdown, which was day and date, where movies were released on the same day online and in the theaters, and it, it wiped out, I would say, billions of dollars in revenue, by virtue of clearly there were audiences who were going to theaters, but if they knew that it was available online, then they so finally the studios have come to their senses, except for one, which I don't have to poke the eye. I'll just sort of, it's obvious what it is, but realize what a stupid thing that they did, and that they're actually going to now give longer windows to movies in theaters, because it actually helps them on streaming. It actually helps them on the other side. So that's a sort of a sheer economic kind of benefit here, and it's not either or. And again, this is not a streaming conversation as relates to why people aren't going to movies. I mean, part of this pandemic, part of it is social media, part of it is video games. There's a whole bunch of things, but there are the thing that many of us who love going to the movies are concerned about is not that movies will go away per se. Clearly, some new Spider-Man will come out and bring in a lot of money, and a lot of people in the box office. I mean, a lot of box office dollars. But the concern for us as independent filmmakers is the smaller movies. How do the smaller movies get seen? How do we bubble up? How do we find a way to kind of actually get seen? How do we, a filmmaker friend who says, "Hey, my movie's on Netflix." Well, good luck finding it. If the algorithm, if you're not watching this kind of movies, Netflix is not going to serve it to you. And in addition to that, it's just another log on a trash heap at some point. There's just so much. So actually having a movie in a movie theater, creating word of mouth, maybe getting a review, which is also hard, and another issue which we won't get to, being able to sort of create kind of a social media buzz. I've got other friends who've got movies in theaters right now. They're killing themselves to kind of get people in and obviously do that. But what option do you have? It sits on a hard drive, or in this case, maybe it never gets seen, or it does get absorbed onto a streaming outlet, but then again, no one can find it. So theaters are such an important part of the ecosystem of how filmmakers find their way. And there's not a single, I don't care how big, any filmmaker, there's not a filmmaker that I've met at this point who says that they don't want to see their movie in a movie theater, because honestly, that's the art form. That's this 125-year-old art form that's really all about a larger screen and this kind of gathering together in real time to share it.
It's a great call to action. Let's end with a call to action. I mean, what do we want people to do? We want them to check out the documentary first and foremost. And the DVD is great. I want to highly praise the DVD because I love all the longer form uncut interviews that are included as special features on the disc. What else can people do? I'll go back to the theater, right? Support independent voices, support smaller businesses.
Yeah, going to see a movie would be a really good start. and ideally going to see something that is not necessarily the blockbuster film. But if you are going to the movies, make sure to invite a friend, get people back. I mean, look, smaller films worked in many cases because of in-theater marketing and things where the playing ground was a little level. You went to a movie, you saw a trailer, you saw a poster, you saw a flyer, you saw a postcard, you saw someone in the lobby who was coming out of another film, and you heard about it. These are the ways in which quality independent films could sort of, they're never going to level the playing field, but they could compete on quality and those kinds of aspects when they couldn't compete with advertising. And that's the system, the ecosystem that needs to be rebuilt. We were closed for 13 months. We've severed that relationship. Getting every person back is what's required, and getting them back, potentially being regular moviegoers. But you know, my sister-in-law saw the film and she was inspired, you know, and during the pandemic, she had started hiking with a group of friends, and they would regularly meet outdoors to go hiking because it was safe. And they all looked at each other and said, you know, we want to keep hiking, but we can also go to a movie once a week. And it's those kinds of things that, you know, are going to make a difference. You know, I keep coming back to the idea of your community and your city, and it's going to make a difference for your community and your city if you can support independent voices, you know, ideally locally sourced or locally owned voices, you know, and your town is going to be different and arguably better.
100%. And I'll, you know, and I'll talk about a couple other things, which is just that have to do with, you know, here we are now at a point in humanity where we see a huge incidence of chronic loneliness and depression and anxiety and lack of socialization seems to be key to that. Technology has given us the opportunity to be completely alone with the fantasy of actually sort of interacting with all of our 1,000 friends on Facebook, and in point in fact, actually, we're just sitting alone. Finding places where we can socialize, where we can actually, even if you come into a theater, the lovely expression, you come in as strangers and you leave as friends, right? So there's this sense of kind of being in a crowd around other humans. We are social animals, and that's important. And you know, again, we're fighting for that. We're fighting for the art form. Now, for your friends who don't believe it's an art form, that ship sailed. I can't help you there. But for those who understand that there is some art involved, you know, the future of the art form is at risk. And I say this now as a union member, because I'm, you know, obviously I'm on picket lines now, you know, fighting for, you know, not just audiences, but in this case, you know, so-called studios to understand the human element in the making of these things and what's involved and how we need to be able to actually survive to do it. The idea that we would be somehow scanned and then, you know, give a one-time remuneration and then, you know, basically, you know, give away our control and our image, our image and voice can appear anyway. It's beyond imagining that could even be sort of suggested. We're looking for ways to come back to something that is, you know, like gathering around a campfire. Really, it's as simple and as sort of kind of elemental as that, and that's what going to the movies is. And you know, for those folks who also understand what family businesses mean and how special that is and how remarkable that is and what a very particular, tangible and important thing to be honored. And that's what we reference in the film, the last family farms or the last bookstores. These things have they're sacred places, and that they should be honored, and we need to just be reminded you know, that, you know, movies are only in theaters because they that's where you should see them.
That's a great place for us to wind it down and leave it. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that I didn't bring up or that we should have covered that we didn't?
The only I could say basically is just, you know, I can do my, you know, if people are interested in finding more, we do have screenings and there will be additional screenings. I'm sure at some point they can find us on our website, which is onlyintheaters.com. There's also a newsletter, and there's also, we're on social media. There's a, you know, there are other ways to find us. And I hope people can sort of, you know, reach out there as well.
Thank you guys. I really appreciate your time. I appreciate you being here. The documentary is wonderful. We want as many people to check it out as they can. Go to the theater, go to the Laemmle, support local, support independence. That's the message. Gentlemen, thank you so much. This was a pleasure.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
I want to thank both Raphael and Greg one more time because this was very, very cool of them to come and talk to me and to be so open and so candid with their interviews. There's a lot of things here, you know, a lot of things that they answered, a lot of sound bites that I could pull here, and I probably will, and post those on their own because, well, I mean, there's conversation about the importance of independent theaters, about what's happening right now in movies, specifically the streaming conversation, and the idea that by putting, you know, these mega $1 million blockbusters, or they're not blockbusters because they're not making their money back. That's part of the problem. These would be blockbusters, these franchise tentpole movies that are costing $200 to $300 million, and then go straight to streaming. I like the way that Raphael said that it's wiped out billions of dollars, and that is absolutely true. For those of us that have been chronicling the numbers side of things, it seems like artistic and commercial suicide, and yet nothing seems to change. There's a lot here to think about, a lot to take away, but I hope the important ones are to support your local cinemas. If you're close to a Laemmle, of course, support a Laemmle theater. I'm, as you heard in the interview, like, I'm so far from California, but when I am in California, I gotta go check out a Laemmle theater because I have so much respect for Greg and what he's doing, and his belief and support in the arts. There are movies that would not have Academy Awards or even Academy Award nominations if they hadn't premiered in a Laemmle where they were able to be eligible for that in the first place. It's a great thing. It's a really great thing. So support the documentary. See it in a theater if you can, because hey, that's what the whole message is about. If you can't, this DVD is an incredible artifact for your shelf, an incredible piece of physical media. Physical media is as important as the movies themselves because it keeps things going. It keeps them preserved. Again, thanks to you guys. Thanks to Kino Lorber. Thanks to Raphael and to Greg. I really appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation. We're going to have another conversation like this very soon. Stay tuned. I appreciate you guys. Take care. Till next time, I will catch you later.